There is a document inside the National Archives with a man's name on it. His age at the time, 21 years old. The document describes in careful bureaucratic language how agents of the United States federal government coordinated his death. That document existed for decades before anyone was allowed to read it. And when people finally did read it, nothing happened. No trial, no accountability. Not a single person went to prison. His name was Fred Hampton. And this is what they didn't want you to find.
In 1956, the Federal Bureau of Investigation launched a covert domestic intelligence program. It had no public announcement, no congressional approval, no legal mandate under existing law. Its name was COINTELPRO, a contraction of Counterintelligence Program. And for the next 15 years, it would operate in total secrecy, inside the borders of the United States, against American citizens. Not foreign agents, not enemy combatants, American citizens. The program would not be discovered by journalists. It would not be uncovered by a whistleblower with a conscience. It would be exposed only because, in 1971, a small group of activists broke into an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, stole a filing cabinet, and mailed the contents to newspapers. What those files contained changed everything. What came after changed almost nothing.
COINTELPRO began with a directive from J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI since 1924. Hoover had built his career on the premise that the Bureau's role was not simply to investigate crime. It was to shape American society, to determine, from a building in Washington, D.C., which ideas were dangerous and which people needed to be stopped. The first official target was the Communist Party USA. On paper, this looked defensible. The Cold War was young. Fear of Soviet infiltration was real, even if it was frequently exploited. But Hoover was not a man who limited his ambitions to the defensible. By the early 1960s, COINTELPRO had expanded to include the Socialist Workers' Party, the Ku Klux Klan, and increasingly, the Civil Rights Movement.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference was placed under surveillance. Martin Luther King Jr. was wiretapped, followed, and subjected to a sustained psychological harassment campaign. At one point, the FBI sent King an anonymous letter that his closest advisors later confirmed was an attempt to push him towards suicide. The letter was written by Bureau employees. It was approved up the chain of command. This is important to understand. None of this was rogue behavior. There were no lone agents going off script. Every operation had paperwork. Every operation had authorization. COINTELPRO ran on memos, on budgets, on signed approvals. The ordinary machinery of a government bureaucracy applied to the task of destroying human beings.
By 1967, the program had conducted an estimated 2,000 individual covert operations against American citizens. 2,000. And not one of them was known to the public. The word the FBI used internally for what it wanted to accomplish was neutralize. It would take years before anyone understood what that word really meant in practice. On August 25, 1967, J. Edgar Hoover sent a classified directive to FBI field offices across the country. The subject line read, "Counterintelligence Program, Black Nationalist Hate Groups, Racial Intelligence." The memo was explicit. The FBI's new goal was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, and otherwise neutralize black nationalist organizations. And then, in a line that would later be read aloud in a Senate hearing room with visible discomfort, it stated the ultimate objective: to prevent the rise of a black messiah, a leader capable of unifying and electrifying the movement. This was not counterterrorism. This was preemptive political suppression, in writing, signed by the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
The target that rose to the top of the FBI's list was the Black Panther Party. Founded in Oakland in 1966, the Panthers had built free breakfast programs for children, community health clinics, and a disciplined political organization. Hoover publicly called them the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. He said this about a group that ran a breakfast program. By 1968, the Chicago FBI field office had recruited an informant inside the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. His name was William O'Neill. He was 20 years old, facing federal auto theft charges, and he agreed to work for the Bureau in exchange for the charges being dropped. O'Neill rose quickly inside the organization. He became the chief of security for the Illinois chapter. His handler's name was Special Agent Roy Mitchell. Mitchell paid O'Neill a monthly salary. O'Neill reported everything, every meeting, every plan, every internal dispute. And at some point, he was asked for something more specific: the floor plan of an apartment on West Monroe Street, the sleeping arrangements of the people inside. He provided both. The apartment belonged to Fred Hampton. The night before the raid, William O'Neill had dinner with Fred Hampton and other Panther members. At some point that evening, Hampton's drink was drugged. The toxicology report conducted after his death found a concentration of secobarbital in his system, a powerful sedative. O'Neill later admitted in a 1990 television interview that he had obtained the drug. He never fully explained how it ended up in Hampton's body. He died by suicide later that same night the interview aired. At 4:45 in the morning, 14 officers from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, working from the floor plan O'Neill had provided, entered the apartment on West Monroe Street. They opened fire almost immediately. Physical evidence recovered from the scene later showed that between 90 and 99 rounds were fired by law enforcement. One shot, possibly accidental, was fired from inside the apartment. Fred Hampton was 21 years old. He was found in his bed, shot twice in the head at close range. His fiancée, Akua Najiri, was pregnant. She survived. She was in the room when it happened. The state's attorney called it a justifiable shootout. He held a press conference. He displayed weapons he said the Panthers had used to ambush officers. That narrative
began to collapse almost immediately. Ballistic analysis, bullet trajectories, the sheer ratio of incoming to outgoing fire. An independent autopsy commissioned by the Hampton family told a different story from the official one.
It took 7 years for a congressional committee to formally examine what the FBI had known and done. The Church Committee, convened in 1975, reviewed thousands of classified documents. What they found regarding COINTELPRO was described by committee members as a systematic pattern of lawless conduct. Senator Frank Church called it a sophisticated vigilante operation. No criminal charges were ever filed.
In the years that followed the Church Committee hearings, the government made a calculated concession. Some COINTELPRO files would be released, a limited number, under controlled conditions. This created the impression of transparency while preserving the most sensitive material behind national security exemptions that could be renewed indefinitely. Through the 1980s, civil rights attorneys and journalists filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the Hampton files specifically. Some documents were released. Others arrived so heavily redacted they were essentially blank pages with a classification stamp. The pages that mattered most, the ones that would have shown direct authorization from Hoover's office for the tactical coordination with Cook County law enforcement, were withheld.
In 1982, a federal civil settlement was reached. The city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government paid a combined $1.85 million to the survivors and Hampton's family. The settlement included no admission of wrongdoing. It was, legally speaking, a way to close a door. Then, in the mid-1990s, researchers working through declassified Cold War-era files began finding cross-references, internal bureau communications that linked Hoover's office directly to the pre-raid operational planning. These documents were logged, noted, and then quietly re-shelved under exemptions that had not expired.
In 2006, the CIA released its own internal history of covert domestic operations. 693 pages, known informally as the Family Jewels. The release was scheduled for a Tuesday in late June. It received one news cycle of coverage. Within 48 hours, it was gone from the front pages. What those documents confirmed, across multiple agencies, across more than a decade, was not a theory. It was a record. A paper trail of decisions made by named individuals in named offices on documented dates. And the decision that followed the discovery of that paper trail was itself a decision. To file it, to classify it again, to wait. They counted on time, doing what secrecy couldn't do forever. Fred Hampton has been dead for more than 50 years. The men who authorized the operation that killed him died without facing a courtroom. The files that could have changed that outcome were managed carefully enough that they never had to. COINTELPRO is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented federal program confirmed by congressional investigation, partially declassified, partially buried,
and almost entirely absent from how this country teaches its own history. The question worth sitting with is not whether governments are capable of this. We have the paperwork. The question is what it means that the paperwork was enough to settle a lawsuit, but not enough to charge anyone with a crime. That gap between what is known and what is done about it is where history goes to disappear.